We were in the desert. It's like the most remote, strange place. And at some point, there was going to be Angelina flying the airplane, and Annie were getting ready to do that. And Angelina was climbing onto the wing to climb inside the little bubble of it's a tiny little cabin. And she looked over at me and she went, "Let's go scare your mother."
I'm Jill Demling. Welcome to my new podcast, Going Rogue. Today's guest is Jonathan Van Meter. Jonathan has spent half his life writing about the most famous people in the world, mostly women, for the likes of Vanity Fair, the New York Times, and of course, Vogue magazine, where he has been a contributing writer for over 30 years. From Oprah to Michelle Obama, Lady Gaga and Angelina, Jonathan has written about them all. His first book, The Last Good Time, came out in 2003, and his second, about a famous woman, of course, will be out at the end of the year. Let's listen as Jonathan Van Meter goes rogue. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Jill.
So when I was thinking about seeing you today, I was trying to figure out when we first met. I know it was a long time ago.
I remember that I would see you in Anna's office every once in a while. And then one night I was out to dinner in some restaurant and you were at a nearby table and you came over to say hello. That's the first time we spoke in public, like away from Anna.
When I wasn't answering her phones.
Yes, it was one of those great big sort of event restaurants. It was huge, cavernous place.
Yeah.
You suddenly appeared next to the table.
I seem to think a lot of people have that story about their first meeting with me somewhere at night. Out and about. So I think our first cover story must have been Moulin Rouge, where we worked together, because that would have been December 2000, but we had to book it a year before. And I would have just been leaving Anna's office as her assistant at the end of 99.
That makes sense. And you weren't able to go on that trip, right?
No.
That's what I remember. I remember thinking like, I was kind of on my own for like a week in Sydney and I remember that there was some kind of a tussle between Annie and I, but I don't remember what it was about. I just remember feeling like I needed to keep my distance.
Well, she hated writers on set when she was doing a shoot. I remember having to tell writers, just stay in the back, like don't let her see you. And a writer would say, "Does Annie know I'm coming?" And I would say, I think I told her.
Yes. So I think that trip was like being lost on a desert island or something. It was like I just didn't know where I was or what I was supposed to do with myself, because I think it was like almost a full week and you weren't on that trip. And then I think right after that is when you started to be like, in addition to the thousands of other things you were doing, like holding my hand, telling me where to be and hanging out with me, because I remember that I was in Mexico on vacation when you called me to talk to me about doing that piece.
It was my first cover booking, so I was still answering the phones in Anna's office because we had to find a replacement for me. That was pretty intense, and I know that Vanity Fair had really wanted that cover story. Jane Sarkin, who was the entertainment director at Vanity Fair, was not used to competition. Definitely not competition by Vogue. To jump into my new position with that cover story was pretty great.
The story that I always tell about doing that piece is I was also at the same time writing a profile of Stella McCartney, and I had hung out with her in Paris during the collections. And then I realized that I needed to see her again in London. So I had to fly to Los Angeles and then to Sydney, and then 5 days or 6 days there. And then from Sydney to London and then back to New York City. So I flew all the way around the world in business class on Qantas. And it was $25,000 around the world. You're like, wow.
That's when the studios had money.
And we all stayed at the Park Hyatt and we all had our own private butler. I remember the butler coming to me and saying, "Hello, Mr. Van Meter, can I arrange anything for you?" I was like, "No, I don't need anything arranged." I was so dumb.
That's wild. Well, I always like to ask my guests how they got their start. So what was young Jonathan like? Was young Jonathan into writing, reading? Did you have a paper route? Were you a little J. Jameson of the school paper? When did you know this was going to be your career or that you wanted it to be?
Well, I grew up in a big working class Irish Catholic family at the Jersey Shore. There was like 8 people in one bathroom, and my parents both worked like more than one job. And so there wasn't a whole lot of like books and literature and sort of talk about arts or movies in our house. And so I just became really obsessed with the radio and music. And like to find time to be alone in our house was almost impossible. So I would just put earphones on and disappear into listening to the radio and making like mixed tapes off of the radio. I thought that maybe I was going to work in radio or in the music business somehow. And then I was in a couple of plays in high school. That was my first, let me see if I can do this. And so when I went off to college, I thought I was going to be either like in broadcasting or I was going to be an actor, something performative. And I was I was a declared theater major when I was a freshman. And I was not even remotely as good as so many other people in the acting students. There were so many people that were just so good. And I was like, yeah, I just can't be like in the lower percentile. You know what I mean? Like I no one in my family went to college. There was no encouraging of any. My parents just didn't have the facility to see that I was like a creative person who was bursting at the seams to do that kind of thing. We grew up on a horse farm, and my sisters played basketball, and they were all on the basketball team. And like, I just didn't fit into the stuff they were doing, and my dad built a basketball court for my sisters. And it was like the focus was entirely on my sisters, and I just drifted around on my own. I was in the band. I was in the band front. That was another sort of performative thing that and in college, that first year of trying to learn theater, trying to learn how to be a proper actor, I was just too much of a hick to understand all of the technique stuff that we were doing. It was just beyond me. And so I was always a really good, I always got A's in English. I was terrible at math and terrible at sciences. And I just kind of drifted towards the English department in college. I went to Westchester University in Pennsylvania, and the theater department and the English and the department were all in the same building. So I suddenly was around a lot of English lit, majors. Mm-hmm. And then I just sort of found my people. And then I started taking writing class. I took photography, and I just took a bunch of classes that were all about, different parts of the arts. And then I finally took this one class, this English lit class, and it was writing emphasis. And the professor, the assignment, there were no tests. And so you had to write 3 essays about 3 different things that we read, 3 novels. And hardly a word was said to anybody. The professor was so weird. And at the very end, he said, "You're a very good writer," to me as I was like walking out of his class for the last time. And a light bulb went on, and I just canceled all of the classes I had scheduled for the next semester and took 7 writing emphasis classes.
Wow.
Like the way that, our personalities, where we just we find something we like and we just want to do it all at once.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's it. That's how it happened. And then I was, there was a literary journal called The Daedalus, and I was on that for 2 years, and they published my photography and a poem that I wrote and a short story, a piece of fiction that I wrote. And then I got an internship at the Daily Local News, which was like a Chester County's daily paper in Pennsylvania. And and that's kind of where I realized I was going to be a kind of a journalist or something. And then while I was in the midst of that internship, I started going to Atlantic City to drive around to all the radio stations to see if I could get a job so that when I graduated, I would have a place to go. I just had no idea what to do with myself.
So you were still focusing in your mind a career at a radio station.
Yeah,
you weren't really thinking of career writing at this point.
Exactly. I didn't see myself as a writer at all. I wasn't the person who read tons of books when I was a kid. I never kept a journal. There was no part of me.
Wow.
And then even after all of those classes where I thrived and having that internship, I still thought you better get a job doing something that you'll get a job at, right? And so I drove around to all the radio stations in Atlantic City and nothing happened, but I drove past a sign that said Atlantic City Magazine, and I pulled over and I went in, and the receptionist was this girl named Kim, and I gave her my resume, and then Lisa DiPaolo was the senior editor at Atlantic City Magazine.
Oh my God.
And she called me and said, she just threw a net over me. You know what I mean? She saw my clips and she saw my resume, and I just had absolutely no idea of my worth or whether I was going to I just didn't know. And so that was it. So that internship that summer that I graduated in 1985 was I learned every single part of magazines, and they would throw me little bones of little assignments. And I just figured it out. And that's how it happened.
It's so wild because your story seems similar in a way to mine, where we fell into it, or we were in the right place at the right time. You
Totally.
saw that sign, you pulled over,
Totally.
and the rest is history.
Exactly. It makes me think of that thing Oprah said to me once in an interview. This is just very funny about signs. She was talking about New Zealand. And I said, you're the third person this week to mention New Zealand to me. And she went, Jonathan, do you believe in signs? And I went, and I hesitated for a little too long. And she went, Van Meter, have you learned nothing from me all these years? It's a sign. She's the person that maybe like retroactively believe in literal signs and figurative signs. I saw a sign and I pulled over and it changed my life.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if we were open to receiving them without even knowing, right? Or
for sure.
Yeah, it's almost like if you're seeking a career in one thing so much, and maybe there's not a passion behind it, it's almost like it won't happen. But while you're searching, if some part of you is open, if your eyes are open even, you're going to see
it's like
that sign.
You have to be prepared to be lucky. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. And that's what it was. There's a lot of luck in our careers, but you have to be prepared for it. You know what I mean? Like I was really learning every little thing I could figure out about photography and radio and reading Rolling Stone and Billboard when I was a teenager, but I just didn't know why. I didn't know what it was for, but it all added up to this thing where I was very prepared by the time I got where I was supposed to be going, I guess,
And what did your parents think about a career in writing? If you're writing for a magazine at the time, it seems pretty cool. Like you seem to have made it in many people's eyes, having a job right out of college.
When I first said to my mom, I think I want to be a writer, I was probably still in college. And she said the most negative thing to me that I'll never forget. You only want to be a writer because your friend Jackie's a writer. So there was no encouragement, right?
Wow.
And by the time I got the job at Atlantic City Magazine, and it lasted for 3 years, and by the time I left, I was like a senior editor and writing cover stories. I think they finally started to get it. And then when I said I'm moving to New York City because I got a job at a magazine, they helped me move there. But I still think that they were like, what is he doing? Like I was 24 when I landed in Manhattan. So by the time I was 26, they got it finally, that it was real,
right.
Well,
I always think back when we were younger with those paper fortune cookies, and the jobs we'd always write down were doctor, lawyer, teacher. I would have never thought there was a job where I'm booking celebrities for magazines. I always loved fashion, but I never thought there could be a career doing something like that.
Well, what's interesting about your specific job is that in the world of magazines, there's even at the height of magazines like Glory Days, there was still only about 10 people doing what it's like a very small subset of like a specific kind of skill set. You know what I mean? And because you were so good at it, somehow it seemed to scoop up so many of your instincts and natural skills,
Yeah, it's very funny. Tell me what happened when you arrived in New York City. Is this the vibe days?
I was at Atlantic City Magazine knowing that I wanted to move to New York, and I started to buy the Village Voice and the New York Times just for the classifieds, so that I was looking for a job in the city at a magazine. But I had absolutely no idea how to go about that. And then one day there was an ad in the New York Times, and instead of having a number, which was like a box that they would put it in, you'd mail it, and then it was a phone number, and it was the only one I'd ever seen. And I called it, and it was an editor at 7 Days that answered the phone, this woman, Liz Logan. That's how I ended up at 7 Days, which was this new weekly magazine that was owned by the Village Voice that only lasted for 2 years. It started in 1988. And I just got a job literally being interviewed over the phone. And I packed my stuff. I quit my job in Atlantic City and I moved to New York with 3 boxes, got a sublet, and started working at this magazine, 7 Days. And 7 Days only had a circulation of 90,000, but it was really well read by magazine people. They loved it. Mm-hmm. And it didn't thrive financially. But when it folded, which is all in one day, they told us to clear out and it was over, my phone rang off the hook. And because everybody had been reading my pieces and I just didn't know. So Anna called, New York Magazine called, Vanity Fair called, the New York Times Magazine called, like literally all in like a span of 2 days. And so I decided I was just going to write for everybody to see what
Yeah.
that felt like. So I did a big Jodie Foster cover story for the New York Times Magazine. I did a profile of Joan Rivers for Vanity Fair with Wayne Lawson. I didn't write anything for New York then, but I did a piece about the Gap. My first piece for Vogue was about the Gap being cool again. And I went to San Francisco to hang out at the Gap for like 5 days. And Anna was the one who, of all of the people that were after me, she was the one who put on the charm offensive. She would call me all the time. She sent me flowers. She took me out to lunch.
Wow.
So that's how, and then she offered me more money than I ever thought I would make, which it sounds like nothing today, but it sounded like so much to me then. So that's how I ended up in Vogue. It was because Anna really turned on the charm and pursued me.
Do you remember your first meeting with her? What had you known about her? What were you thinking?
There was a guy named Ricky Lee that worked at 7 Days who was super into fashion. He'd worked at Interview, and he was always poring over Vogue and obsessing over this new person, Anna Wintour, that had become the editor-in-chief of Vogue. And I knew nothing about fashion. So none of this would have come into my brain had Ricky Lee not constantly put it in me. So I was really fascinated, like, who is this woman, right? And my first meeting with her, I walked into her office and there was that kind of easel thing set up where there was like 6 or 7 different cover options for the same picture. It was Ivana Trump. And she said, her first words to me were, sorry, we stooped a little low this month for cover sales, for newsstand sales. That's what she said. We stooped a little low. Oh my God. So I was like, I'm going to love this person. You know what I mean? That was my first reaction. But yeah, I just remember that. That's the part I remember the most. So I signed a contract and it was for like, I think it was like for 3 long pieces and 3 shorter pieces. Like I did a piece about Karl Lagerfeld's new perfume. I remember going to interview Karl Lagerfeld in some hotel on the Upper East Side. And I was like, yeah, this is not for me. I don't want to be writing about fragrances, you know? Oh, and then James Truman left to go develop details. And then I got hired to be that person in that role to come on staff. She called and said, do you want to work on staff? And I said, yes. And then I got even more unhappy. I just realized it wasn't right for me. And so then the Vibe call came. And so I slowly but surely did all of that interviewing, and I got an escape hatch from Vogue to do Vibe without having to like ruffle feathers or like I'm leaving to go do this great big opportunity to be the editor-in-chief of a new magazine. And Anna was still a little bit miffed. She wasn't like thrilled. But then Vibe happened, and then when Vibe ended, I ran into Anna at a big gallery opening in Soho, and she said, hello, let's have breakfast. And that's how I came back to Vogue.
Got it.
It's like in 97, I think I went back.
How amazing that you're getting all these incoming offers at all points in your life.
This is a thing that I talk about a lot because I'm 61 now, right? If only 27 could know what 61 knows, like what a crazy thing happened to me that the whole magazine world like rolled out the red carpet for me. And I didn't have to I never had to pitch a story to anybody ever. Not one. And so I instantly became a freelance writer. Like, you know, that's the kind of thing that is hard for a lot of people, right? And I just was so spoiled. And I just didn't understand how lucky I was at the time. I must have come across as a real asshole because I was like,
well, it's funny because I found this article, 40 Under 40, class of 93 in Crane's New York Business. And the first sentence is, some people in the magazine business cringe when they hear Jonathan Van Meter's name. That makes perfect sense. After all, the boyish-looking wonderkind tops the masthead of one of the hottest and most controversial new test publications of the year, making him one of the youngest people running a magazine.
It's wild.
That's major. One of the youngest to run a magazine.
It was so crazy that happening to me. It doesn't feel real. It's like a simulation. You know what I mean? Like there's a glitch in the simulation or something. Like what? One day I was at Vogue, unhappy, and the phone rang, and it was the executive secretary to Gil Rogan, who was the chief operating officer of Time Inc. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And so I met with Gil, and it was explained to me that Quincy Jones and Time Inc. Ventures were going to do a test issue of, you know, they didn't even know what to call it at the time. They were like, Quincy Jones basically wants to start a Black Rolling Stone. And I was like, okay. And here I am, a white guy And then it turns out that the reason that they called me was because they were asking all around every sort of talented magazine editor about who they should talk to. And my name came up twice. Adam Moss, who was kind of my mentor, he was the editor-in-chief of 7 Days at the time. He said to them, Jonathan has the taste of an 18-year-old black girl.
That's so great.
Which is like true.
Yeah.
And also, that's one of the reasons that they were super interested in talking to me, which I think is so funny.
That is funny.
And the other person was the editor-in-chief of Sassy.
Oh, I loved that magazine.
Yeah. So she said that you should talk to Jonathan Van Meter too. And so that's why they interviewed me. And then I had one interview after another with like the structure of the Time Warner world. I flew out to LA and Quincy interviewed me in his enormous mansion in Bel Air. And then I had to meet with Russell Simmons, who was involved at the time. And it went on for months. And then finally I got the call and said, you got the job. And I was like, what?
And what were you thinking? I mean, you were a writer and now you were taking a very different position. I mean, some editors-in-chief were writers. Anna was not. It's a lot more business oriented as well.
Yes. And I didn't fully understand that at the time. That's one of those situations in life where it was like, I just jumped in with both feet without looking. It's funny. My mother always made fun of this about me. Like I often made decisions without thinking about it that sometimes led to amazing things and sometimes were kind of disastrous, right? It's kind of a crapshoot that way, but it's still the way I do things. I just like, take the leap. And so I just also was a little bit full of myself. At 28, you're just like, sure, I can do that. And there was a lot of parts of that job that I was very good at. Like I hired the most amazing art director and the most amazing photo editor because I really understood how things should look. It was like something, I think the way the magazine looked was the most successful thing about it. Less good at the business stuff, like having to go, like fly to Portland to talk to the people at Wyden and Kennedy that do the Nike ads, like having to make the pitch. I mean, I was like, what am I doing in this room? Like, anyway, and then also going to these very structured business meetings at Time Inc. You know, it was like, it was intimidating.
And did you get to write at all? How was that? No.
I didn't write at all. So it was just about curating the magazine and then working, kind of being like Anna. Like having watched Anna, I was just like, I'll just try to do it like she did it. And it was hard. They should never have hired a white gay man to edit a hip hop magazine. They should have never hired a 28-year-old white gay man to edit a hip hop magazine. But that's on them, right? That's the mistake.
Right.
And then I had to suffer the consequences of that because it was very controversial. It was like, why is this white man, editing what is essentially a black magazine? It was weird.
And how long were you there?
I was hired to produce a test issue and hire a really tiny staff to do that. And I had months to produce this one issue that they put on the stands in September of that year. I guess it was 93 that they put it on the stands. And then the staff dispersed when we were done. And then it was in production. Then it went on the stands. And then we waited to see if it did well. And it sold like crazy. The ad director sold so many ads that she had to close the magazine. So it was this huge success. And then we had to get proper offices and staff up. And that like a year. And then when I was finally officially the editor-in-chief of a magazine that was going to go forward monthly, I think I produced 10 or 11 issues before it was all over. So it was probably 2.5 years all told, but I think I only produced like 12 issues in all that time. Then there's the story of how it all ended, which was sort of crazy and bizarre. Should I tell that story?
Yeah. I mean, I've read some things about it. Something about Quincy didn't want a Madonna cover, and then I heard a Dennis Rodman was involved. So I don't really know. It was a long time ago. So you can still find on the internet, bits and pieces, and no one would go on record. That's what I remember.
It's in some books now. There's a book called Fashion Killer, where I finally told the whole story to this writer. And actually, she did a pretty good job of telling the story. It came out last year. It's about hip hop and fashion. So the magazine was conceived once I was in charge as a kind of, if you take the idea of a black Rolling Stone it's really what you're talking about is an urban culture magazine. So it's like every kind of music that isn't rock and roll, basically.
Or country.
Exactly. There's a lot of things that fall into that. So what we always talked about it as like most of the people, it's like the opposite of most magazines in America at the time. Most people were white, and then occasionally there were some black people. We're just going to invert that. Mostly it's black people, sometimes some white people. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I had reached out to Liz Rosenberg early on and said, if there's any chance anywhere along the way to do a Madonna cover, just let me know. And she was like, well, you should come up with something interesting for her to do because she's sick of doing profiles. She's sick of doing straight up interviews for, another picture of Madonna on a cover. Who cares? And so one day I saw in USA Today that some reporter had like stuck their microphone in Madonna's face when she was at a basketball game. I think it was a New York game, and asked her what she thought of Dennis Rodman, who at the time was like, he always had like green hair and like, he was like still beloved by people. He hadn't gone off the rails yet.
Right.
She said, he's like the Madonna of basketball. And I was like, why don't I get the two of them together to like have a conversation, and we'll do a shot of them together.
Oh my God.
I proposed it to Liz Rosenberg, and she said yes. And so off we go, right? This will be amazing. And so, flew to Miami, got the two of them there. I gave them the tape recorder and all the questions. We did a big photo shoot.
Wait, and they hadn't met yet? I mean, because they dated later. So
exactly.
Did you matchmake them?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how they met.
Wow.
And so like I stayed there for a week because then I had to go get the interview transcribed, and then I took the transcript to Madonna's house, and I still have it with all of her markings on it. Like,
oh my gosh.
Let her edit it a bit, and I wrote an introduction to it, and then the cover, everything was all set to go, and then the phone rang one day, and Quincy said, "I don't want you to run this cover," and I was like, "You're fucking out of your mind? What?" His reasoning that he expressed to the press later was that in that issue, we finally had this amazing action-packed issue that was like the goal was to have it be so there was a big profile of Eddie Murphy, there was a big profile of Spike Lee, and so those guys were calling Quincy to say, why are we not on the cover? Why is Madonna on the cover? And that's what made Quincy, that's what made him feel like
well, it's a music magazine, people.
Really weird. And so I just kind of thought this is the end of the road for me, because if you can kill the best cover that I can think of, and not the best, not the only good cover, but it was like I moved heaven and earth to make it happen. And it cost a fortune. Like I was like, we can't kill this. And so that's when I was like, I'm done here. You know what I mean? I got to go.
So it never saw the light of day?
It never was published.
And did Madonna or Liz call Quincy or?
Oh, yeah. So Madonna called me. She sent me flowers with a note that said, what we risk reveals what we value, which I've always loved.
Wow.
She also called me again and said, I'm going to start my own magazine, like interview. Maybe you could be the editor-in-chief. That never happened. Liz Smith wrote a whole column about it from my perspective and Liz Rosenberg's perspective. Madonna was really mad and completely on my side. Like it was on CNN, it was in the New York Times, it was covered. And it was horrible. And I was so unhappy. I mean, I was like humiliated and like embarrassed, and it just felt like such a failure, but everybody was talking about it.
So even when you said, if you don't run this, I'm going to leave.
Nope.
And then did they run a cover at all? Did one of those profiles get the cover or?
They put Eddie Murphy on the cover. And then the way that I knew for sure that I'd made the right choice, because I thought somebody's got to stand between Quincy and then like journalism, right? This guy can't make this magazine dumb. And 6 months later, there was a Michael Jackson cover. It was styled by one of Quincy's daughters. Tommy Hilfiger was the designer. And the thing inside was all of these people testifying to what a wonderful person Michael Jackson is when he was in the midst of all of child abuse stuff. And it was just like, see, this is what I was so glad to see that, because I was like, I can't be a part of a magazine that does that kind of thing. Rehabilitate somebody who is being publicly, anyway.
Who might have been on Quincy's label, or that's the thing when you're getting too involved and it's for one person's personal reasons using the magazine. And that definitely does happen with these newspapers being owned by these moguls. Where we saw it around the elections and who decided to endorse or not endorse based on the money guy that was behind it. So
the other thing that really was bothering me that I told no one about was that Gil Rogan, the chief operating officer of Time Inc., who was like my Lord overseer, he was constantly butting in and editorially, and I was always pushing back. And then I'd go to meetings at the Time Life building, and in his giant office with his giant sectional, and a black man would come in and shine his shoes while he was talking to me, like on the floor under his desk, shining his shoes.
Oh my God.
This is disgusting, right? This is disgusting. And it would make me feel sick to my stomach. And then one day, Jane Pratt had just been there just before me, and she would always wear little mini skirts. She left, and I came in and sat down, and he went, man, her pussy was just a thin piece of cotton away. He was like looking up her skirt and talking about her pussy being a thin piece of cotton away. And I was like, I cannot work for somebody like this. And I had to let that boil inside of me for like a few months before. And then this was my out.
Yeah. And you're not good when something's boiling inside of you. It's hard for you to conceal that.
You know all too well.
So after Vibe, you bumped into Anna. And I mean, she most likely heard about it. Did she call you when she heard about it, or?
So like, it was weird. Like, I didn't hear from anybody. I felt like I'd been cast out. You know what I mean? I always used to say that, like, oh boy, when I went to be the editor-in-chief of Vibe, I kind of they tore up my white card. And I struggled to get back into the white world. You know what I mean? Like, it was weird. But I also was pretty miserable. You know what I mean? I was genuinely depressed at that time for like a good year. So like I had trouble sleeping. I was just so unhappy. I went to film school. I went to the NYU Intensive Writers Workshop. I had a film workshop, which was like 3 months of going to class for 8 hours every day because I thought I was going to like make movies and just get out of magazines altogether. And then one day I went to it was like one of the big Vogue photographers had a big show in Soho, and it was packed. And I got off the elevator, and I saw Anna from across the room, and we waved to each other. And then eventually we made our way towards each other, and she just said, let's have breakfast. And so that's how that turnaround started. Like, she threw me a life preserver, basically, because I was.
And at this point, you were not thinking about pursuing another editor position. You were like, let me go back to writing. And
there was a lot of phone calls from people. Like, I was headhunted. Time Out. It was starting, and they interviewed me to be the editor-in-chief, and I was like, yeah, I don't think I want to do that ever again. It was just not my strong suit.
Yeah. So we did a lot of cover stories together, and you didn't just write about actors. You wrote about politicians, Hillary, Michelle Obama. You had the icons of Oprah, Lisa Marie Presley, and musicians, Gaga, Rihanna, Adele, on and on and on. Who did you like to interview the most? Was it you loved music? Did you feel like the musicians were your thing, or did it not matter?
It's an interesting question. I for sure writing about musicians was like right in my wheelhouse. Like I would say the Lady Gaga pieces that I've done are probably my favorite in that category, and she is a favorite. Like, I just loved talking to her.
What was it about her? Let's talk about Gaga, because I know there is that picture that's still probably on the internet of the two of you leaving a hotel or a huge crowd. I just remember some crazy Gaga story.
Yes. I met her in. It was December of 2010, just before Christmas. I went on tour with her, and it was like 3 nights at the O2 Arena and then 2 nights in Paris at some stadium that I can't remember what it's called. And it was like a snowstorm happened, and so the whole thing got like crazy. Like, it was the concerts in Paris got delayed by a few days, so I was trapped in Paris in the middle of a snowstorm. There was something amazing and wonderful about all that, but it was like I met her backstage after a concert when she was bouncing off the walls, covered in fake blood, eyeliner running down her face, in like a great big voluminous red of ostrich feather bathrobe. Like it was just this wild lunatic, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And I was just so fascinated by her. And then when we finally did our interview, I think we were in Paris. That's what that picture is. Those paparazzi pictures are us leaving a restaurant at a really late lunch, early dinner before we went to the arena. And I was just like, I could talk to this girl for hours. And she said to me that day, "You and I are going to be talking about music for years." And I was like, what? And it turned out to be true. 15 years later, I just wrote my fourth profile of her. She was absolutely right. We're going to be talking about music for years. Like just so casually, she said that.
Yeah, and she loves the fans so much. I mean, it was funny when I worked with her not too long ago. We had to dress her from the racks after the shoot wrapped to leave the studio because her fans knew where she was going to be. Most celebrities actually try to not let their fans know where they are.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the crowds outside of the studio, and she wanted a new look, and she did the whole thing where someone gave her a bouquet of flowers, and then as if she was the bride, she threw it behind her into the fans. That picture reminds me of that because they just know where she is, and she's so gracious to them too.
Yeah. We left the hotel one day in Paris, and she said, "Do you want to go out the front door so that you can see and see what it's like?" And I said, "Okay." And it was a maw of churning people screaming and yelling. I got knocked to the ground. My tape recorder went flying out of my hand. I had to get grabbed by a security guard and pulled into the van. It was really intense.
What does make a great interview? I know obviously a lot relies on the subject and them being open and willing. I know when I book the celebrities, the interview is the last thing they want to do. Their walls up and don't ask them about this, don't ask them about that. And a lot of times I told the Vogue writers, I know you want to ask about the person they dated or some situation that they don't like to talk about. At least wait till the end. Get a full interview before you ask them in case they end up walking off set. But I realize you need to get that, but please wait till the end.
Yeah, it's funny. You had a role in what makes part of it work, which was, for me, the ideal scenario was always, can we hang out one day and then can we really talk another day? Can it be like a couple days apart? Can sort of feel each other out? And then if that wasn't possible, then it was like, can I have one interview and then another interview another day? What really always worked for me, and I almost always got this, was the first interview, I didn't even write down questions. It was like I was meeting somebody for lunch, chatting, and I would not ask them. I would just talk. And that's that's what I think was sort of the thing that worked best for me, because they would see you as a person, not somebody that was there to get something from them. That wasn't transactional. It was
right. You're not putting the recorder, next to their lunch plate.
Just as a rule, I never, ever put a notepad and a pen out on the table when I was having lunch with somebody, ever, because it just reminds them that they're like, anything's being written down. And so I would just remember everything that I could see that I wanted to note and write it all down as soon as the interview was over. But the other thing about that too is that I would write down questions and then color code them. So if it was going really well, all the questions were up for being asked. If they were answering questions really too quickly, I had the color coded thing. So like there were the extra questions because they didn't want to open up. And
right.
There were the people that talked endlessly, and then those were coded a different color because these are the most important ones, because I'm not going to get all my questions in because they fill up the time with the longest answers.
Right.
So I was really prepared with like 3 different plans every time. You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh. And do you remember who was your favorite interview? I mean, you have tons, and it can be more than one because Gaga is up there, and I know 5 that I know you're going to say.
Yeah.
But I would love to know best and worst, because as a writer, you're getting an assignment. When we talk about who we think should write a cover story in a meeting, I'm thinking personalities, who's going to jive with someone. But also we're thinking about who has another piece in the issue, who's working on something and they're not going to be available. So you might have been given a profile that you did not want. So all of that, I would love to know, like best and worst. And do I have to do it? Yes, you do.
Yeah. Obviously, Jennifer Aniston is one of them because I wrote about her a bunch of times. She was just so fun to hang out with. After the first interview where it was a little awkward, and then the day ended and I got a call from Stephen Huvane the next day saying she wants you to come to her house tomorrow because she could see she just saw who I was, realized that she hadn't been open, wasn't comfortable. And I felt the same way. I was like, this is going to be lame. And I had to change my schedule and then went to her house and we hung out and we smoked cigarettes with her dog. And it was like the real life. You know what I mean? And so I was like, oh my God, I love her now. And so every piece I ever did about her after, we would laugh our heads off and like drink tequila and smoke cigarettes. She was just so fun. And then there was that same feeling with Jennifer Lawrence, obviously. She just wanted to play. Like we went on a 7-hour bender once, you know, like it started at the Odeon on a Friday at like 1:00 in the afternoon. 7 hours later, I left her hotel room. Like we'd emptied the mini bar. You know what I mean? It was like, it was just insane.
And I love it. That's when the publicists are like, she has 45 minutes. It's like, really?
Yeah, good luck. Renee Zellweger is a really interesting person to interview. If you catch her in the right moment and you can tap the vein, she's so unusual and she just says the most unusual things and she can just riff. She loses the self-consciousness of being interviewed. That's what it is that some people just never lose that self-consciousness about the fact that they're being interviewed, and some people do. Like Oprah is really fun to interview. She's very focused. She really listens to your questions. Some people really want to answer your questions. That's what I love. Some people want to shoot the shit for hours. Some people want to answer your questions, and they want to really do it thoughtfully. So even if it's that 1 hour and a half interview, if they're really focused and they listen to you, it can be truly amazing in just an hour, but they've got to be focused and unafraid. You know, Catherine Zeta-Jones also was really fun. Like I remember hanging out with her on the set of Chicago and her husband, Michael Douglas, was there and he and I were hanging out off camera, laughing and yucking it up. She'd be shooting a big scene, dancing and singing, all sweaty, come over and hang out with us. And then the three of us would stand there talking and it was like, some people just allow you in that extra layer. Like when you're suddenly with a very famous woman and her husband, and then she's not always talking to you, but she's talking to him, but you're allowed in, then you get to see who they really are. They're not just focused on you answering your questions. They're talking to other people around you. And that's, you get to write a better profile. So some people give you that gift.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking about Chicago. You had to do the cover story on both of them together as well. So you went to set, because I remember this very clearly, even talking to you from set. Rob Marshall was great and very respectful of writers and of Vogue. Some directors, producers, not so much, because you are there while they're filming. But I do know that Rob Marshall was very supportive of any sort of Vogue cover story, but then having to interview them offset together, how do you manage that when it's two stars?
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever done that before or since. It was, but what helped is that I had already done a profile of Catherine Zeta-Jones and I'd already done a profile of Renee. So there was a sort of a level of trust that we could somehow pull this weird trick.
Because they're very different. They're very, very different.
Well, I always remember the lead to that, which is that when I got to the restaurant, Renee was already there in sweats, like Lululemon, no makeup. She was drinking a bottle of water and she ordered spinach and some other vegetable. And then Catherine Zeta-Jones was like 15 minutes late. She arrived in a full-length fur coat in a cloud of perfume, ordered a rare steak and a bottle of red wine. It was like the difference was so
and she probably showed up in a limo as she did around that time to the photo shoot with a bottle of champagne. It was a very movie star arrival.
I remember being like the moderator. It was like they were talking and I was encouraging them to talk about different subjects. It wasn't so much an interview, and I'd never done that before. It was fun though. It was weird. But yeah, there are other favorites. Like, I'm trying to think.
Well, you have Jen Aniston and Angelina, so we should jump into that because you interviewed them both the first time. There was no relationship between the two.
Right? Exactly. Right. It was Angelina first, and then 6 months later, Jennifer, and they had no connection of any kind.
Right. You did 4 Angelina and 3 Jennifer, and they started to intertwine towards the end. I know the last time we even featured Jennifer was because the cover line on the magazine that mentioned Angelina's name. And I know you were the first to say that neither of them ever mention each other's names. So it'd be interesting to know how that whole relationship went between. I know you felt like they were speaking to each other through you in a way.
It started to feel that way. And one of the ways in which I realized that was when I was with Jennifer. She was renovating an enormous house in the Bird Streets in the Hollywood Hills. And so we were hanging out at the renovation, basically. And there was this room that was set up in amongst the ruins of this house with construction workers. That was like the command center. There was like a little refrigerator. There was a table. It was like for her to come and hang out and talk to the construction people and the architects and stuff. So we sat there doing this interview. It was a very unusual location. And she suddenly switched into, I am now going to address Angelina.
Wow.
It was a part of her agenda. It wasn't because of a question that I asked. And I was like, oh, this is what we're doing. Okay.
You must have had an interview when she was married to Brad.
Yes, the first one. They had just gotten married. She showed me the wedding pictures in practice.
Okay. So thinking of the timeline, so you did a cover story with Angelina, January 2007, and then you have a cover story the year after, December 2008, with Jennifer, which is when that cover line, what Angelina did was very uncool, sparked a lot of drama because obviously, as you've said many times, they do not mention each other's names. So I would love to hear about those 2 interviews because that was Jennifer's last and the second to last time you did Angelina.
Yeah. The first time I did Angelina, we were in Montreal. The second time was in London. The third time, wherever that was, somewhere. This one interview that I did with her, she said something about wanting to meet with her. I'd be happy to meet with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jennifer read that and must have been just really pissed off. And so by the time I'm at the enormous mansion that Jennifer's renovating in the Hollywood Hills, that's when she suddenly had this like clear agenda that she wanted to get that off of her chest and say it on the record, right? But she just said what she did was really uncool. That was the thing that kind of landed. I don't remember the rest of the riff, but that was what landed for me and was in the piece. And that wound up on the cover that was then edited to put her name in, right?
Right. I'm going to grab the issue. December 2008. Yeah. Because I know it was 2 sentences because I kept going into the art department. For anyone that doesn't know how it works, we have a dummy book of the entire issue with a cover. We've chosen the image we're going to use for the cover. The last thing that is dealt with is the cover lines, because the cover lines are supposed to be pulled quotes or a sentence that summarizes the piece. So I had kept going in there to make sure the red dress was on the cover, the dress she wanted, because the last cover we had run with her was not great. She was not happy. So I just kept saying, okay, great. It's still on the cover. There's been no changes. We shipped. There were no cover lines on that dummy book before it shipped. So there maybe was a reason for that. So when I get the call, and I know we've talked about this, we both got a call from her publicist. We had sent her a first bound. First bound copies had the corners cut off. They weren't for sale, but that was the way to give a sneak peek of a cover story or of the issue before it hit stands. We weren't doing it digitally then. So I would FedEx a first bound. So they had a couple days to see the issue before it hit stands. And I get a call and I'm thinking it's going to be, thank you so much, Jill. We love the cover. And no, it was shocking. I hadn't even seen the cover line. When I put that issue into the envelope, I didn't even think to look at it. And right when I got into the office that Monday, I read over and over again the whole piece in the dummy book, and never once does she say her name. And it really was only 2 sentences.
What's funny about that is that it's like the one thing that they expect from Vogue is not to be treated like the tabloids treat them. And that was what happened there. It was a very tabloid vibe.
Okay, here it is. When I ask her about Angelina Jolie, Aniston asks me to turn off the tape recorder for a moment. Suffice it to say, if there's never any love gained in the first place, there can be no love lost. But she did want to put a few things on the record. Funnily enough, they involve some of the same issues brought up by the recent profile of Jolie in the New York Times, in which she talks about falling in love on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. She asks me if I ever saw a cartoon that appeared in the New York Post a couple of years ago that depicts Aniston talking on the phone in her kitchen. The bubble over her head says, "Hi, Angelina. I decided to take you up on your offer of the sit-down talk." In the drawing, Aniston is loading a shotgun, and there's a copy of Vogue sitting next to her. The cartoon was inspired by an interview I did with Jolie for the magazine January 2007, in which she said she'd welcome the opportunity to sit down with Aniston. Someone sent Aniston the cartoon, and afterwards she could not resist the urge to buy a copy of Vogue to see what the fuss was about. What really rankled Aniston about the piece that Jolie felt the need to recount a detailed timeline of exactly how her relationship developed on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, while Aniston was still married to and living with Pitt. There was stuff printed there that was definitely from a time when I was unaware that it was happening, says Aniston. I felt those details were a little inappropriate to discuss. That stuff about how she couldn't wait to get to work every day, that was really uncool. So the cover line, "What Angelina did was really uncool," was referencing the article, the interview that Angelina did, not taking her husband.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember feeling manipulated and pushed around. And the thing that I said a minute ago is that I think people trust Vogue because it lifts things up out of the gutter of tabloid bullshit. And I thought that was Vogue stooping to this kind of tabloid vibe, these weird cover lines that feel like they weren't true.
Right.
And it's funny, that reminds me that Andy and I were on our way to Argentina to a wedding right as this whole thing was happening. And you go to a newsstand at the airport, and there was like one of those newsstand displays where every single cover appeared to be either Jennifer or Angelina Jolie, and all of them were about this. And it was like a giant checkerboard, right?
Wow.
It looked like a Warhol display. And Andy stared at it and he went, "You're the Woodward and Bernstein of this situation, whether you like it or not."
I love it. There's so many other funny stories I remember either hearing about from you or witnessing on the set of the Angelina Jolie shoot in Barstow, where her planes were, when next thing I know, you're getting on the plane. I mean, she had flown from LA to Barstow. That's where they keep their planes. And it was the first time she had flown without an instructor. And I know her assistant, when they landed, looked white, because I don't think Holly, her assistant at the time, knew she'd be flying to Barstow without the instructor. So tell us about that. It's hilarious.
Because I had said earlier, my mother is scared about the idea of me flying with you. Like, ha, 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 right? And she said, "Let's go scare your mother." And so I just ran and jumped on the plane, and it was like, and literally off we went. And Annie and I were sitting in the back seat, which is this tiny little bench, right?
Yeah.
So we're squished right up against each other, and Annie's got like 3 different cameras, and so she just dumped them in my lap because there was nowhere else to put them. Then she at one point decided she wanted to be in the seat next to Angelina in the front, so she climbed over. She had to climb through this tiny little. There was hardly any room between the top of the seat and the.
Oh my God! While she was flying?
Well, Angelina was flying, and so she wasn't going to make it. I had to put my hand on the butt and push Annie through.
And I remember, didn't you say something like, if something had happened, it would be the famous photographer Annie Leibovitz, movie star, or something like that, and other.
Yeah. So while we were flying, by the way, Angelina was like, "Maddox loves it when I make G-forces," right? Which is basically like flying in a circle or upside down or dropping the thing. He's like, do you want to try it? And was like, oh, before we even asked, she just did it. And we were like, stomach dropped. And then we landed. I called my parents and I said, and both of my parents got on the phone and I was like, I just flew with Angelina Jolie and it was wild. And my dad said, does anybody remember who else went down with Patsy Cline? And I was like, what? And he's like, well, if he had gone down, nobody would remember. It would only be about, and then I was like, well, the headline would read, Angelina Jolie and Annie Leibovitz die in plane crash in desert. And I would be like on the fourth paragraph.
Oh my God. Wasn't there something funny with Amy Schumer? I mean, I remember trying to schedule that. I remember us on the phone looking at her comedy tour and figuring out what cities, and there are, I think, all in the Midwest, that you were going to be going along with her to. Where?
What happened was, I don't remember exactly how it unfolded in the earliest part, but it all got sort of mixed up and confused, and maybe it was going to get canceled right at the last minute. And then you called me, and I was really hungover, and said, she wants you to fly out, just meet her at Teterboro and come with her on her private jet. And I was like, fuck, so hungover, like brutal. And I was like, no, I can't do that. And then you're like, you gotta. So I got my shit together and I got to Teterboro and off we went. And we went to a bunch of different cities. But what I remember most is that two things. One, I sat down on the plane and she got onto the plane and we were facing each other. And Joan Rivers had died and she was my friend for 25 years. And the first thing she said was, tell me the funniest thing Joan Rivers ever said to you. And it was like, so like a perfect thing to say to somebody.
Right.
A comedian, right? Like knowing that there's got to be the funniest thing she's ever said. And then when we landed in Minneapolis, the news came on to all of our friends that Prince had just died. And it was the weirdest thing to land in like the land of Prince when Prince was just dying. You know what I mean? It was,
oh my gosh,
really amazing. It colored the whole experience for us.
And then sometimes things don't go your way. Right. So Rihanna, so I remember all the calls from you from Barbados, and I remember trying to be like, just go enjoy yourself. It's going to happen. Take this time. I know she canceled again, but it's going to happen. Just go to the beach, like trying to make it a vacation for you so you wouldn't obsess about the fact that the interview kept getting bumped.
Yeah, I landed in Barbados and went to my hotel. It was right on the beach. And then there was this waiting game that went on, and which I had done before. And then it got pushed further. We were supposed to meet like at noon or something. And then that got pushed. And it was like, no, it's going to be at 6 p.m. And then another call, no, it's going to be at 9 o'clock. And so it was me sitting around in and out, ready to go. And also you're nervous before interviews, no matter how many times you've done them, and you're prepared and you get yourself psyched and it's go time, right? Oh. So I was trapped in the room waiting. And then somebody said, have you looked at her Instagram or her Twitter? I forget which.
Oh, because Jonathan, at first it was supposed to be jet skis. Exactly. But then the weather wasn't good. Then it was something like she's with her family, but then why don't you guys go dancing later? I remember it kept getting pushed, exactly what you just said, but it went from jet skis to like dancing. Nightclub.
I was like, if I could score an Adderall, like I was like so alone in my room, so tired. But I remember somebody said, have you looked at her social media? And there were all these pictures on her social media of her partying with her dad or something. It was really weird. And I was like, oh no, what am I doing here? I started to get this weird vibe. And it was almost like too many little details piled up and created the perfect storm to make me go crazy. And crazy I went. And I called you, I called Anna, I called Amanda Silverman. The mistake was probably calling Anna because she said, just leave. She was the one who said, just leave. And so I just left, and in the car on the way to the airport, Amanda Silverman called and said, Rihanna's going to call you. And then the phone rang and it was Rihanna, and I didn't pick up. I was like, nope, I'm leaving. It's too late. Anyway, it was very bratty of me, but
no, but listen, I can only imagine writing and the zone you have to be in, and then writer's block and deadlines, and it's a creative thing, and to have to produce as much as you did, back-to-back covers and deadlines that cannot be moved.
Yeah.
You had no choice but to get the story. It would have taken a lot to even get you out of that space to be able to even be present. It's a lot. It's a very psychological profession.
It is a psyop for sure. And the thing is, I like to like people, to write about people that I actually like and like to be around and respect their work. And it's just so much better for me. And in that case, I thought, I can't interview somebody when I'm so mad at them.
Right.
I was furious. And I thought, there's just no way you'll be able to show up in the right state of mind. Even if you snap out of it, it's going to feel fake and forced. I said this to my shrink recently, that doing these interviews, it is sort of like you're performing. It's a performance of yourself. It's not like you're performing somebody else. You're playing you, but it's a performance. You have to turn on your full personality and put away all of the other parts of your personality that nobody wants to deal with, right? Like,
right.
You have to be your best self. And so there is this performance aspect to it, even though you're playing yourself. You know what I mean?
I thought about that when you said you had a background in theater, because it's true. You do have to perform. And sometimes you have to perform different parts of yourself. Like,
totally.
I will say to you, like, okay, so, she's pretty mellow. So go in there this way or that way. Because it's all about how to get the best interview, how to crack that code,
Yeah.
Another story I remember, because we were together in LA for it, was Lisa Marie Presley, when you did her interview. So I would love to hear it again, actually. I just know there's a blindfold involved.
Yeah, it was Lisa Marie and her mother, Priscilla Presley, and then Riley Keough. It was like the three generations, right? So there was a kind of idea that I would interview them separately and then all together. But I think I interviewed Priscilla first, and then I met the three of them at the Four Seasons, and we all had lunch. And then I was to go from that lunch with Lisa Marie and Riley back to their compound in Calabasas in Hidden Hills. And I remember that when the cars were pulled around, she didn't have any cash. And I was like, I have money. And so I just did ballet for Lisa Marie, which always makes me laugh. Like Elvis' daughter. No, I got it. I got that. You know what I mean? And then in the car, she smoked cigarettes the whole way with a window down and her bare foot up on the dashboard, like smoking and driving with one hand on the dashboard and blasting her own music with her daughter in the back seat, like eye rolling, like all the way up into the back of her head. And it was just the strangest situation. I feel like there was a blindfold moment that we didn't.
Like she didn't want you to see the street or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like when we got to Hidden Hills, and I don't remember if it actually happened or she wanted to blindfold me. I can't remember. But yeah. And then we hung out there. That was just one of those stories where I couldn't believe, like you would never be able to say, who I really want to interview? Lisa Marie Presley, Priscilla Presley, and Riley Keough. Like just wouldn't occur to me. So that's
right.
That's like the magic of Vogue. Like they can make that happen. And then you get to be the beneficiary of that. Those were the pieces that always surprised me. I would never have thought of that.
Is there a cover story that you didn't get? I think the general feeling at Vogue was that you were the favorite, that all cover stories or features were run by you first as Anna's a student. So yeah. I don't know if there's one that you didn't get, or even in general, if there's someone who's on your bucket list, that one interview that you have to do before you die.
I never got to do Madonna for Vogue, and it bugged me. I thought that maybe Madonna didn't want me to do it, or no one would ever tell me why I could never do a Madonna interview. It was like so weird.
Oh.
And I always thought that maybe I was not being told the truth, because why is it never happening? You know what I mean? Anyway.
That's so strange. That would seem like a no-brainer.
I know.
Oh, I guess Hamish probably did that one at home when she turned British.
Julia Roberts is a person who I've loved and admired and been fascinated by, and I've never gotten to interview her. So that's one that's in that category. Mm-hmm. I used to say Hillary, but then I got to do that. And a couple of years ago, I used to think Meghan Markle would be a great interview for me, but I feel that less now. She's become like a regular person now.
Right.
Was still a princess, fully ensconced in the castle. I thought, oh, that would be fun. You know what I mean?
And I know that when we used to have these features meetings, if you had done a cover story of a celebrity already, the general consensus was someone else should do it. And I didn't understand that. I'd always say, well, we got a great piece with Jonathan. He's super comfortable with so-and-so. He should do the second one. Our Vogue readers most likely have read chapter 1 and will get more out of it if it's Jonathan. So what was that like when there's gaps between meeting a celebrity and just diving back in, or any changes that you were surprised to see someone that was so different than the first time?
Yeah, that was, again, not something that I would have thought of, but you orchestrated that in a way that sort of quietly started to happen all the time. And it turned out to be amazing. Charlize Theron comes to mind. Like, when I first met her, she was still finding her way in the movie business and in Hollywood. And we were in Berlin. It was like we had ran around and drank beer and ate pizza. It was so fun. It was like off the radar. And then the next time I saw her, she was like a full-blown superstar. And we left Orso in Beverly Hills and tried to sneak out some back way. And yet there were still like 50 photographers, paparazzi, that swarmed her car. I mean, from Berlin, where she was walking around with not a single person knowing who she was, to a few years later where it was like she could barely move. So that was the one thing that you would really see, is the way that somebody's fame had changed, and the way the pulled close. They closed ranks and were not being as open with the world and not wanting to be out in public. And so the interviews often took place in sort of much more private arenas and where they were comfortable, and we knew they wouldn't get harassed or interrupted. And yeah, that was an interesting thing to see. I never minded that process, though, because you could really see the machinery of fame.
And you were part of it. When they had that cover of Vogue, they made it. So
yeah, it's so funny. I never thought of that.
Yeah, 1.3 million people just read about them.
But, it's funny. I don't want to slag anybody, but people often say to me, who did you not like? And I always go, well, Reese Witherspoon. And it's not that I didn't like her. It's just,
of course.
He was very, very controlled, very, very self-conscious, didn't loosen up. I couldn't make her laugh. Like, it was just like none of my charms worked on her. You know what I mean?
Right.
But then, foolishly, 3 years later, 5 years later, maybe 10 years later, they're like, do you want to do Reese again? And I was like, oh, well, maybe she's changed. Nope, nothing changed. Nothing worked again. It was like a really short 1.5 hour interview in a restaurant.
Yeah, it's work. Yeah, she definitely views it as work.
Yeah,
for sure. Did you ever have to interview someone that you really didn't want to, or that you didn't believe in maybe their views, and you had to write a glowing piece about someone that you just didn't feel that way about, and not necessarily at Vogue, in any other job?
At Vogue, the two things that stand out are my Blake Lively profile. I just didn't connect with her at all.
Right.
I didn't care that much about her body of work, and I should have said no. And she was odd to hang out with. She kept making jokes that weren't funny. And so I was able to get that feeling into the piece, so I didn't feel like I was like betraying my own sense of it.
Right.
And then years and years ago, Jewel, I agreed to write a Jewel. It was like one of the earliest putting stars on the cover. And I was just like, I didn't like her music. We hung out and we didn't connect. And I turned in a piece and Anna was like, Jonathan, you can't say this. It was like, I let it all hang out and I had to get reined in, but I've looked at that piece now and it really comes through. Like, you really can see that I don't like her.
Well, you just made me think of something. So when we first did Beyonce, listen, we did her really late. And the only reason I think Anna even agreed to do her when we first did was because Katherine Heigl had dropped out of an April cover. And I remember getting the news that she had dropped out on a Friday night, and I'm in the movie theater, that her movie had moved. And I had said she should still do it. It's a shape issue. If she doesn't, she's never getting a cover. And I just said that without anyone telling me I was allowed to, but they still said, sorry, she's not going to do a cover without a movie. And I was scrambling. We had 2 weeks to get it together. And I saw that Beyonce had a movie, a Screen Gems movie, I believe. And Anna approved her. And I remember after your piece came out, because, a lot of times I'm moving on to the next. Once the shoot's done, once you get your interview, I'm on to May, June, July, August. So I didn't read the piece, but my friend did PR for Screen Gems and called me and so upset. She couldn't believe you had written something about the film, or...
Yeah, I think
it was a ridiculous film, but...
Yeah. I think there was a tiny mini review saying, I don't remember, something snide and snarky.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
really upset them. They don't like that. They don't like it when the profiler critiques a movie in the profile.
Right.
Funny. I learned that making that mistake a bunch of times. But I just sometimes if the movie's terrible, I feel like I've got to say so.
Yeah, of course. Of
But
course.
I remember about that interview is it's the last time that I think people say to me all the time, you got the last interview with Beyonce where she was loose and funny and like the last magazine profile because she stopped doing that.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
I also got to go to the set of Dreamgirls for that piece and watch that big number towards the end. Like I was,
Oh, wow.
and I remember that was really thrilling.
So Britney Spears, I still remember the two of us going to the VMAs at Radio City.
Yeah.
And that was when she had the Python.
That's
like,
right.
It's so crazy we were there.
I know, it's so weird.
At the show. But I had really wanted to have her on the cover. And I'm really glad we did that cover story. It will remain a very famous cover story for Vogue. But I would love for you to talk about that because it did land in the middle of September 11th because the issue was a November issue. So we had to shoot in August, which we typically don't do. But because of her schedule, that was the only time she could do it. So I remember doing the shoot with her Brits in LA. And then we had to turn that and ship it pretty quickly in September to make it for the November deadline. And September 11th happened right after that shoot. And I know you had to go back and interview her again right after September 11th.
By the way, I always think of those months, that summer. I always call it the final hours of the golden years. Like we didn't know what was coming. And if it's so funny that what I was doing in the final hours of the golden years was hanging out with and thinking about Britney Spears. It was like the funniest thing. I went to Las Vegas and she was still with Justin Timberlake and he had a big concert that I went to and he did a celebrity basketball game that was for charity that I went to. But what I remember the most about that trip was she was at the Bellagio and she had not just a suite. It was like on the ground floor. So she had a backyard, like a grassy backyard. It was probably 15 rooms. It was like a dining room table that would seat like 20 people. It's just like a enormous, sprawling place. And she was wearing like really ripped up bell-bottom bootleg jeans with big holes strategically everywhere. Like practically her ass was hanging out. She was 19, I think, right? And it's barely their clothes. And so it was awkward. I remember thinking, God, this is so strange interviewing this really young person who was not sophisticated enough to answer some of my questions,
Yeah, the Lolita, I remember.
So that was the big prize winning moment when I said, and I didn't put this in the piece because it was impossible to write. It's kind of random. I just threw this question. So how do you feel about being called Lolita? And she said, I don't even know what that is about. What is it about? And I said, well, and then I thought to myself, this is the voice in my head. Oh my God, you're going to be the one that explains Lolita to her. Okay, get it right. Do not screw this up. So it's a very famous novel by a Russian writer. I didn't even say Nabokov. I was just like, and it's about, it's about like a 13-year-old girl who has a relationship with a much older man. And it was like, as the more I talked, the worse I got. And she just stared at me and went, oh my God. Ew. See, I don't like that. That's what she said. It was like, she was like, she had no idea what Lolita was even referencing. So funny.
Looking back at your career, there has been challenging times. How have you learned to overcome those? You had talked earlier about if you knew then what you know now, the advice you would have given your younger self. Any nuggets of wisdom for the younger generation, anything that you can share?
Well, I would say the number one way that I've handled this kind of weird high wire act of a career is having a really good shrink. And I've been seeing her for over 30 years. It was absolutely required for me that I be able to have this one thing, this one person that I could totally trust and say anything to. It was the crucial element to me being able to get through. And also the vibe firing, some of the other ugly moments, even the little things like the being sort of mortified that I left Rihanna in Barbados. Like I regretted it immediately and felt like a fool. And just having that person. My biggest problem over the years has been sort of being a hothead from Jersey. I react. I'm a very emotional person, and I cry really easily. I'm quick to anger. And for me, learning how to control all of my feelings in different moments has been one of my life's greatest accomplishments. I'm much better at not reacting. When I was like 28 or 30 years old, if I could have figured out to just take a deep breath, walk away, take 5 minutes, I just didn't understand it. I always thought that I was made to feel about something was like literally how it was always going to be. Just couldn't imagine that I was going to ever not be that angry about that thing. And of course you don't. I just think it's really important to have wise counsel and to learn how to take a deep breath and step away from things. You don't have to decide everything in that very minute. The magazine world forces you to, right now, we got to decide who's the cover. Do you want to do this piece? And it's like, can I have a minute, please? Like,
Exactly.
can I please have a minute? Can I think about this overnight? I only ask that question now. I never used to ask that. Can I have a minute to think about it?
Oh, no, especially with Anna. You didn't get a minute. A minute would have been 1 second.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like any news. I'm like, I just left your office.
I don't know. I guess it's probably getting older too. Oh no. So this is what I would say. I developed a skill really early on to put most of my personality away so that I could do an interview and just be zen, right? And listen. If I can listen to every word. And I would always think, why can't I apply this to my real life? Why when I'm out to dinner with my friends can't I do that? Put half of your personality away and be calm.
And compartmentalizing. That's what you're also doing when you're doing an interview, especially multiple ones.
Yes, that's obviously the right word for it. I hadn't even thought about that. And why can't I compartmentalize in my real life? And so I'm learning finally how to do that. And it's helped me tremendously. But I don't really know the secret to it. People talk about compartmentalizing as somehow it's got a negative connotation. I actually think it's really useful, you know?
Yeah. And do you think that is your superpower? I know you're a super fun guy, super smart. I enjoy hearing your stories about everything. You crack me up. But your superpower in being so successful at what you do, and not just successful at actually writing great pieces or what you're actually doing, but just great at what you do to get what you need.
Right. Yeah. I think that for me, it feels like I'm very good at creating an environment where people can open up. There's a trust that's developed really quickly with me. And I don't always understand it, but I see it happening. And I hear people say that to me. You're so easy to talk to. I can tell you anything. Right. And that's been true with my real life. And then the other thing I would say is I am in the business of sort of getting people, trying to get them. And I just saw the little clip of Oprah saying 20 plus years ago, he really got me. Jonathan really got me. And I've heard it many, many times. And the cover story that I did of Kim Kardashian in 2019, when she read it, she called me and she said, there's no better feeling in the world than when somebody gets you, which I remember. I always have to think about exactly how she said it. There is no better feeling in the world than when somebody gets you. And I thought, that's it right there. You just gave one sentence about why I have succeeded, because people feel gotten by me. You know what I mean?
Well, it just came to me. You have to do two jobs. You're not just writing. You have to get what you're writing about. You have to get the information. Yeah. And then write about the information you just got. You're doing the work to get it, to write it.
Yes.
I mean,
it's two different feelings and two different almost personalities too. And, you know, it's funny, that reminds me of another thing. I was writing a piece for the New York Times Magazine, and my friend Diane Cardwell was my editor at the time, and Adam Moss was the editor-in-chief. And she told me that they had just been in a meeting where they had gone over the piece that I just turned in. And Diane said, Jonathan gets such good stuff out of people. And Adam said, and he knows what to do with it. And I,
exactly.
That was the nicest compliment. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That sums it up. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
At the end of each episode, I like to ask my guests 7 rapid fire questions, and they're the same 7 for everybody. I think I know your answers, so I'm going to see how I do after you answer them, because I've written my answers that I think might be your answers.
Okay.
Okay. AM or PM?
It used to be PM, now it's AM.
Uber or Subway?
Uber.
Book or film?
Film.
Sweet or spicy?
Spicy.
Spots or stripes?
Stripes.
Top or bottom?
Bottom.
Okay, so I did not do well. The only one I got was PM.
It's so funny.
This was so fun, Jonathan. I just
it was
love
great.
going down memory lane with you. That was the best of times. Being in New York, publishing at the Heights, and all the fun, laughs, tears.
You have been such a big part of my life in the most unusual way. That's what it is. It's like I talk about you all the time, and so many of my friends haven't met you before somehow. But it's like, Jill, they only know you as this person that like no, we spent so much time together on the road. We slept in the same bed a bunch of times. We were like road warriors or something.
Yeah, partners in crime. Every shoot was better
Totally.
when you were there. It made work fun. Thank you again.
Let's just hang up on each other like we used to.
Exactly. Okay, awesome.
Perfect.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Welcome, my darling.
Love you.
You.
Okay, that's our show. Thanks for listening to Going Rogue. And be sure to like and subscribe. Today's show is produced by me and Maddie Rosenberg at Radio Free Rhinecliff with assistance from Maddie Kelly. Special thanks to David Vo for our great graphics and Taras Romanov for our epic theme music. See you next Friday.